Stacy Ann Falcon was born on October 23, 1971 in Renton, Washington. She grew up in a loving family and had an older brother, but eventually her parents split up. Stacy was a cheerful, outgoing girl with a big circle of friends. During high school, she met a guy named John and they started dating. Soon after graduation, they decided to move to California, and a few years later, they welcomed their son, Jacob. But after spending several years in California, Stacy and John decided to move back to their hometown. Not long after they returned, their relationship started to crumble, and eventually they went their separate ways. So Stacy ended up raising Jacob on her own. She got a job as a waitress, rented an apartment in a small residential complex, and worked hard to make sure her son had everything he needed. In the fall of 1994, Stacy was 22 and gearing up to celebrate her birthday. On October 23rd, she decided to surprise her mom by stopping by with her son. Even though they lived in the same city, Stacy's place was pretty far away and her busy work schedule didn't leave much time for visits. That day, they celebrated her birthday together, and later Stacy and Jacob headed home. For days later, on her next day off, Stacy went out to celebrate her birthday with friends. She left Jacob with a trusted babysitter and spent the evening hitting up a few clubs, having a great time. After midnight, Stacy went back to her son. She got to the babysitter's place around 1:30 a.m., grabbed Jacob, and went home. About 2 hours later, a newspaper delivery worker was starting his morning route in the same neighborhood. As he passed a short dead-end street, he spotted a parked car with two bodies lying on the ground nearby, a woman and a boy. He immediately called 911, and officers soon showed up at the scene with paramedics. It didn't take long for authorities to confirm that both victims were dead. Based on initial observations, the cause of death appeared to be gunshot wounds. Investigators also quickly identified the victims. It was Stacy and her son Jacob. Detectives began examining the crime scene, trying to piece together what had happened. Near the car, they found several bullet casings, as well as Stacy's belongings, including her cell phone inside the car. One detail immediately stood out as particularly strange. Both Stacy and Jacob's shoes were found several yards away from the car. It seemed like the killer had deliberately taken off their shoes, but no one could figure out why. What puzzled investigators even more was that Stacy's wallet and jewelry had been left untouched, making robbery an unlikely motive. Another strange detail of the crime scene was the discovery of 3 white buttons that didn't seem to belong to Stacy. This led investigators to believe they might have been left behind by the killer. The car keys were found wedged between the door and the driver's seat. Nearby, police also discovered used tape. This led investigators to believe that the killer's original plan might have been to steal the car, leaving Stacy and Jacob tied up. But when the perpetrator couldn't find the keys right away, things may have taken a deadly turn. Once the bodies were handed over to the medical examiners, they confirmed that both victims had died from gunshot wounds. Stacy's body also showed multiple defensive wounds, indicating she had fought back against the attacker. This theory was further supported by the dirt on her socks and the trampled grass near the car. Investigators believed Stacy might have managed to break free from the assailant and even get into the car, but she didn't have time to drive away. The attacker pulled out a gun, shot both Stacy and Jacob, then dragged their bodies onto the road. The medical examiners also found no evidence of SA, ruling out that as a possible motive. After wrapping up at the crime scene, the police started canvassing the neighborhood, hoping to find witnesses. A few residents mentioned hearing a woman scream and gunshots around 2:11 a.m., but none of them had called the police. They explained that the area wasn't exactly safe, and the sound of gunfire wasn't uncommon. Unfortunately, none of the neighbors could provide any additional information because they didn't see anything. With all the information they had, police ruled out 2 major motives, robbery and SA. They shifted their focus to potential suspects within Stacy's inner circle and decided to talk to her mother. That morning, she was working her shift at a cafe when detectives showed up to deliver the horrible news. As expected, her reaction was devastating. Overcome with grief, she ran out of the cafe, sprinting several blocks before collapsing on the ground in tears. Once officers managed to calm her down, they began asking if she could think of anyone who might have wanted to harm her daughter. The detectives first learned that Stacy had once lived in the same apartment complex as the babysitter she had left Jacob with that night. But Stacy decided to move out after hearing gunshots near her home one evening. Since then, she had been living in a different neighborhood, would occasionally leave her son with the trusted babysitter. Next, her mother mentioned that at the time of her death, Stacy was dating a man named Rich. According to her, relationships seemed pretty normal. Rich got along well with Jacob and spent most of his time living at his own place. The detectives went to speak with Rich, and he told them that he had spent the evening at a bar near Stacy's apartment complex. Later that night, while Stacy was still out celebrating her birthday with friends, he went to her place and fell asleep there, as he didn't feel like driving back to his own apartment after a few drinks. Rich claimed that he woke up early in the morning and initially didn't think much of the fact that Stacy and Jacob weren't home. He assumed they must have come back while he was asleep and then left early without waking him. Rich denied any involvement in the murders and agreed to take a polygraph test. However, the results were inconclusive. The operator flagged several questionable responses, which kept him on the list of potential suspects. Even so, there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime. Witnesses at the bar confirmed seeing him there that evening, and investigators couldn't identify any clear motive for him to harm Stacy or Jacob. With no solid leads, the detectives decided to dig deeper into Stacy's personal life. They turned their attention to Stacy's ex-husband, Jacob's father. He told them that on the night of the murder, he had gone out drinking with friends, then returned home, played pool with his roommate, and went to bed. His friends backed up his story, but just like with Rich, his polygraph results raised some red flags. Still, there was no evidence linking him to the crime. Forensic experts examined Stacy's car and all the belongings found at the scene, but they couldn't uncover any foreign DNA or fingerprints. With no direct leads, investigators were left at a standstill and had to dig further into the case. Not long after, they received a call from a local hospital about a suspicious man who had shown up in the middle of the night wearing blood-stained clothes. Detectives immediately went to question him and collected his clothing for DNA testing. The man claimed he had gotten into a fight with his girlfriend and denied any involvement in the murders. Despite his statement, police decided to detain him until the lab results came back. However, forensic testing confirmed that the blood on his clothes didn't belong to Stacy or Jacob. With no connection to the crime, the man was cleared as a suspect and released. Sometime later, detectives got another lead. They found out that before picking up her son, Stacy had stopped at a grocery store. When they checked the CCTV footage, they spotted a man talking to her. Unfortunately, they couldn't identify him and the lead went cold. The next clue came from Stacy's phone. Investigators found that the last incoming call she received was from a man named Scott. When they went to question him, Scott told them he'd been home with his wife and kids that night. He also admitted that they had briefly dated in the past, but their relationship ended when Stacy found out he was married. Despite the breakup, they had stayed on friendly terms, and his wife confirmed that he was at home the night of the murders. Still, something about Scott raised eyebrows. According to Stacy's friends, he had once left her a $100 tip at the cafe where she worked. Considering Scott had a pretty low-paying job and a family to support, this gesture seemed unusual to investigators. As they dug deeper, they began to suspect that Scott might be involved in dealing illegal substances. But while this was an interesting lead, it didn't bring them any closer to solving the double homicide. Still, they didn't rule out Scott's involvement, direct or indirect, and kept him on their suspects list. For the next few weeks, police struggled to find any new leads. But then something completely unexpected happened. 2 weeks after Stacy and Jacob's murder, officers found Scott's body stuffed in the trunk of an abandoned car. Scott's brother told investigators that, on the day he disappeared, Scott had planned to visit a man named Vince. The brothers had a side hustle fixing up cars, and they'd installed an expensive sound system in Vince's car. But Vince never paid them, so Scott had gone to demand his money. That's why his brother was convinced that Vince had killed him. Police tracked down Vince, who denied any involvement. However, a search of his apartment turned up traces of Scott's blood, and investigators discovered that Vince had been using Scott's credit card after his death. Vince was arrested, and detectives working Stacy and Jacob's case questioned him, hoping he might know something about Scott's potential involvement in their murders. But unfortunately, Vince had nothing useful to share, and this lead went cold too. For months, the case remained at a standstill, but shortly before his trial, Vince suddenly decided to plead guilty. He claimed that he had killed Scott in self-defense, saying Scott had threatened him. According to Vince, Scott admitted that he had killed Stacy because she was planning to tell his wife about their affair. Vince also added that he and Scott had been involved in selling illegal substances. Detectives, however, weren't quick to buy Vince's story. The timing seemed far too convenient. Just before facing trial for murder, Vince penned another killing on Scott, along with allegations of criminal activity, conveniently framing his actions as self-defense. Still, with no other leads, police had no choice but to investigate Scott's possible connection to Stacy's murder. But the deeper they dug, the less credible Vince's story seemed. Scott's wife was adamant that he'd been at home with her that night and couldn't have been across town committing a murder. His brother also dismissed the idea of an ongoing affair between Scott and Stacy, saying Scott would have mentioned something like that if it were true, because the brothers were very close. On top of that, Scott's brother insisted that Scott had no involvement in dealing illegal substances. He claimed they both made an honest living repairing cars. Detectives ultimately concluded that Vince's story didn't add up, and it seemed like nothing more than a desperate attempt to dodge responsibility for his own crime. After that, the case went cold. Over time, it was filed away and no real progress was made. The only person still searching for answers was Stacy's mom. She kept reaching out to detectives, but one by one, they either retired or got moved to other departments. At one point, she was told the case would be handed over to Seattle's cold case unit. But when she tried to contact them, she found out the unit had been shut down due to budget cuts. In the early 2000s, police received a lead on a new suspect. An inmate contacted investigators claiming that his acquaintance, a man named Charles, had confessed to killing Stacy and Jacob. According to the informant, Charles worked with Stacy at the same cafe, and they both were allegedly involved in selling illegal substances. The story went that Stacy had threatened to turn him in, which supposedly led to her murder. The detectives found this story a bit far-fetched, but with no other leads to follow, they decided to dig deeper into Charles's possible involvement. They sent all the existing evidence back to the lab for analysis, hoping that modern technology might uncover traces of DNA missed during the original investigation. But there was one major problem. The lab was overwhelmed with other cases, and the detectives were told they'd have to wait an entire year for the results. In 2002, detectives finally received the call. Using modern tools, experts had successfully identified DNA traces on the gloves and duct tape found at the crime scene. And they had a match, but it wasn't Charles. Instead, the DNA belonged to an entirely different man who had never once been on the police's radar. That man was Jerome Jones, a name that had never come up in the case files before. Investigators started digging into his background and uncovered a long criminal history that went all the way back to his teenage years. Jones had been arrested for robberies, assaults, car thefts, and drug-related offenses. Then, in 1995, just a year after Stacy and Jacob's murders, Jones and an accomplice killed a businessman outside his home in California, and in 1998, he was sentenced to life in prison. Detectives also discovered that in 1994, Jones had been living in the same apartment complex where Stacy had lived before moving out due to safety concerns, and where her babysitter lived at the time of the murders. Even more chilling, Jones had worked at the club where Stacy had celebrated her birthday with friends. Detectives traveled to another state to question Jones in prison, but he denied any involvement in the murders. Every following attempt to get him to talk led nowhere, yet a direct DNA analysis confirmed that the biological material found on the gloves and duct tape at the crime scene belonged to him. However, there was a major problem. The DNA on the gloves and tape was considered circumstantial evidence. The detectives knew it wouldn't be enough to secure a conviction. So, they requested an analysis of the biological samples taken from the victims' bodies during the initial investigation, which had been preserved in storage. This time, the experts made a breakthrough. In the samples taken from Stacy's mouth, they identified biological material that matched Jones's DNA. This not only further confirmed his involvement, but also indicated that Stacy had been the victim of SA. Soon more evidence surfaced. Jones' DNA was also found under Stacy's fingernails, providing yet another link that tied him directly to the murders. With all the evidence in hand, detectives approached a district attorney to discuss filing murder charges against Jones, but they faced an unexpected setback. The DA wasn't convinced the existing evidence was strong enough to directly tie Jones to the double murder. So he asked crime scene experts to reconstruct the crime scene using the new evidence, hoping to get a clearer picture of how Jones could be connected to the crime. What happened next remains unclear, but for some reason, the case came to a standstill. It's unknown whether the DA's request for a crime scene reconstruction was ever carried out, but in the end, no charges were brought against Jones. Perhaps the investigators felt less urgency to pursue the case since Jones was already serving time for another murder. Or they feared that the available evidence wasn't enough to secure a conviction. As a result, the case was shelved again, despite multiple DNA matches connecting Jones to the crime. But the saddest thing is, the police never informed Stacy's mother about these developments, even though she had been tirelessly pushing for any progress in the investigation. For years, Stacy's mother continued reaching out to investigators, but over time, the officers changed, and she eventually lost contact with anyone responsible for the case. Determined to find answers, she began reviewing all the available information on the case with the help of her sister. This effort stretched over 15 years, until in 2017, her sister passed away. From that point on, Stacy's mother carried on the search alone, but every attempt to achieve justice led to a dead end. In 2019, a journalist from Seattle got interested in the case. He contacted Stacy's mother and began digging into the investigation. Eventually, he discovered that the police had matched DNA from the victim's body to Jerome Jones more than 15 years earlier. Shocked by this revelation, he was baffled as to why no charges had ever been filed against Jones despite such compelling evidence. When he shared this information with Stacy's mother, she was devastated. She couldn't believe that all this time, the police had a suspect tied to the case by multiple DNA samples, yet failed to act on it. The journalist reached out to a former detective who had worked on the case during those years and asked why Stacy's mother hadn't been informed about the DNA match. The detective explained that the evidence seemed too inconclusive at the time to draw definitive conclusions. He also admitted that he had been handling numerous cases simultaneously and simply didn't have the time. The journalist then asked the district attorney the same question. He responded that it wasn't his responsibility to notify victims' families about case developments, so it hadn't even crossed his mind to reach out to her. Finally, the journalist compiled all the available information into a detailed article. The story caused a significant public outcry, almost instantly reigniting interest in Stacy and Jacob's case. When the new team of detectives reviewed the evidence gathered by their predecessors, they too were stunned that no charges had been filed against Jerome Jones, and began preparing the case for trial. Around this time, things took a rather unfortunate turn. Jerome Jones, who was still serving time for another murder, was granted parole, even though he was supposed to remain behind bars until at least 2030. This created a sense of urgency for the detectives and the prosecution, so they rushed to bring charges against him before he could be released. By early 2022, they finally brought official charges, and Jones was arrested. Right after his release from the California prison, he was extradited to Washington and placed in custody while awaiting trial. Unfortunately, Stacy's mother did not live to see the day when the man responsible for her daughter's and grandson's death would be held accountable. She passed away just 4 months after Jones' arrest. Despite this, the prosecution was determined to see the case through to the end and secure justice for Stacy and her son. Based on all the available evidence, they presented their version of events regarding what had likely happened that fateful night. According to investigators, Jones allegedly attacked the woman almost immediately after she left the babysitter's house. He either forced her to pull over by threatening her with a weapon, or she stopped for some reason, and that's when Jones approached her car. Based on the prosecutor's theory, Jones' initial plan was to steal her car, But in the process, he decided to SA Stacy. He forced her out of the vehicle and tied her hands, but she managed to break free during the struggle. She ran back to the car where her son had been sitting the whole time, and that's when Jones shot them both. After that, he dragged their bodies out onto the road, planning to drive off in the car. But he couldn't find the keys. They were wedged between the seat and the door. In the end, he fled the scene, leaving behind several pieces of DNA evidence. During the preliminary hearings in May 2023, Jones pleaded not guilty and the prosecution began preparing for trial. As of now, the trial hasn't started yet and Jones is still behind bars. But with the evidence they've got, there's little doubt about his involvement. And if the jury finds him guilty, he's facing a life sentence. So, this case is finally coming to its logical conclusion, even if it took 3 decades to get here. The crazy part is, Jones probably could have been charged as early as 2002, just 8 years after the murder. But for reasons that still aren't clear, it took a full 20 years to bring charges against him. Even though Jones has been in prison the whole time, Stacy's mom spent years in the dark, heartbroken that she couldn't get justice for her daughter and grandson. And now, as Jones might finally be officially convicted of their murders, she won't be around to see it. The case of Alicia Ross. A young Canadian woman named Alicia Ross vanished without a trace from her own bedroom in the middle of the night. The police were unable to find either a body or any significant evidence, and as a result, the investigation stagnated. The case might have remained unsolved had the criminal not turned himself in to the police. Alicia Ross was born on February 8, 1980 in the Canadian city of Markham in the province of Ontario. There is no information about her biological parents, but it is known that they gave up their rights to the child, and she was adopted at a few months old by a couple named Marvin and Sharon Ross. Her adoptive parents provided her with love and care, and they did everything to ensure that their daughter had everything she needed and could fully develop her talents. When Alicia started school, her adoptive parents decided to divorce, but they maintained a friendly relationship and continued to participate together in their daughter's life. Soon, Sharon remarried and her new husband, named Julius Forrest, treated the child as if she were his own daughter. The girl performed well in school, demonstrated exceptional skills in drawing, and also developed a passion for photography and a love for discovering new cities and countries. After finishing school, she spent a year in Australia, where she traveled and enjoyed life before returning home and enrolling in university in the summer of 2005. The 25-year-old Alicia went on a hiking trip in the mountains with her friends, where she met a young man named Sean, with whom she began a romantic relationship in early July. He was 4 years older than her, but the small age difference did not bother the couple. On August 16th, the young woman, along with her adoptive mother and their dogs, went for a stroll in the park. Alicia appeared cheerful and shared that she was expecting a promotion at work to the position of senior sales manager in the coming days. She was very proud, as she had been working hard for a long time, and her efforts were about to be rewarded. Additionally, the young woman discussed her boyfriend, Sean, whom she had been dating for just over a month, but seemed deeply in love with. Alicia hoped that this romance could grow into something more meaningful in the future and expressed a desire to introduce her new boyfriend to her adoptive parents by arranging a family dinner. After her walk in the park, the mother returned home and her daughter went on a date with her sweetheart. She promised not to be gone long, as she had to get up early for work the next day, where her promotion was to be decided. The women said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. Sharon never saw her daughter alive again. The mysterious disappearance from her own house that night, after meeting with Sean, is what led to the unsolved case. Alicia invited him to her house and they had a great time together. Around midnight, the young man went home and Alicia accompanied him to the door, which served as a second exit from the backyard. They said goodbye with a kiss and he left, promising to call her as soon as he got home. Around midnight, as promised, Sean called his girlfriend, but she didn't answer the phone. He wasn't overly concerned, thinking Alicia had simply fallen asleep since she had to get up early for work. However, the next morning, when he tried to call her again and she still didn't pick up, he became genuinely worried and contacted a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same office as Alicia. From her, he learned that Alicia hadn't come to work and he immediately rushed to her house. On August 17th in the morning, Sharon and Julius planned to play golf with friends and left the house at 10. They saw their daughter's car in the driveway, but assumed someone had taken her, so they went about their day. A while later, Sean went to Alicia's house but couldn't find her, so he called the police to report her missing. He then called Sharon to inform her. The couple rushed home, where the police were already there. Sean was the first to notice Alicia was missing and inform the police. He was also the last to see her the night before she disappeared, saying they had parted ways at the gate around midnight and hadn't heard from her since. When Sharon and Julius approached the house, law enforcement was already there, inspecting the area and speaking with Sean, who had called them. The young man appeared visibly nervous and distraught. When the mother looked into Alicia's room, she immediately noticed that all her daughter's personal belongings, which she never left the house without, were in their places. Her purse, passport, driver's license, keys, cell phone, as well as her bank cards and cash, were all left in the room, suggesting she wouldn't have gone anywhere, let alone left without them. The gate was open but not forced, implying that the missing person either let her abductor in or willingly left with someone from the yard. In the backyard, the police found some disturbance. The lawn and flowers in one area were trampled, as if someone had fallen there. Also, a pair of cigarettes and the right sandal of the girl, the one she had been wearing the evening before, were found on the ground, laid out in a straight line. Neither Alicia nor her parents smoked, so the cigarettes did not belong to them, and Sean claimed he never smoked that particular brand, leaving the ownership and arrangement of the cigarettes unclear. Sean was almost immediately considered the prime suspect. Firstly, he was noticeably nervous and his account seemed somewhat confused and disjointed. Secondly, he was the first to report his girlfriend's disappearance to the police, even before speaking with her parents and confirming that they too had not seen her. Thus, he definitely knew she was missing. Additionally, law enforcement found biological traces on the girl's bed belonging both to her and Sean. Based on this, the investigation speculated that Alicia might have denied Sean intimacy, and he decided to force her, then trying to cover his tracks, staged her disappearance, which he likely caused by ending her life. When Sean was brought to the police station, questioned, and the investigator's theory presented to him, the young man was shocked. He was distressed to be considered the primary suspect and swore he would never harm his girlfriend as he loved her. He also acknowledged that they did indeed have intimate moments that evening, but insisted it was consensual. The missing girl's parents also had nothing negative to say about Sean. He had not argued with their daughter, had not mistreated her, and she spoke only positively of him. Their relationship was developing quickly and quite happily, to the extent that Alicia even hoped to have a future with him. Moreover, the parents noted that their daughter had no plans or reasons to leave. She was eagerly awaiting a promotion at her beloved job, and being a responsible person, she would never just leave everything behind. But even if some unforeseen circumstances had arisen, she would certainly have informed her parents and definitely would not have left without her documents, money, and phone. Police lacked sufficient evidence or grounds to detain Sean, and so, after questioning him at the station, they released him. Nevertheless, law enforcement did not rule him out as a suspect and continued to monitor the young man. Sean himself appeared dejected and highly distressed. The extensive search effort for the missing woman began the day after her disappearance. Initially, a thorough inspection of the home and yard was conducted, and investigators closely examined the surrounding area and interviewed neighbors. However, no one reported hearing or seeing anything suspicious that night. Law enforcement theorized that the woman disappeared sometime between midnight, when she said goodbye to Sean, and sunrise, a time when the streets are usually quiet and deserted, making it challenging to find witnesses. Alicia's photos were distributed as flyers throughout the city, providing phone numbers for people to report any information about her whereabouts. The story of the missing woman was widely covered in the news and featured in popular publications, sparking significant public interest and prompting hundreds of volunteers and concerned citizens to join the search. The police received numerous daily calls related to the case, although most of the information turned out to be false or mistaken. Nevertheless, each tip and theory was investigated in the hope of finding any leads. The search area was continuously expanded, involving more people. Thorough checks were conducted in abandoned buildings, wooded areas, and wastelands. Sean also actively participated in the search efforts, despite still being the prime suspect. Feeling wronged, the young man turned to the media and gave a significant interview where he expressed his deep love for Alicia and showed photos of them looking very happy together. He tearfully pleaded for help in the search, appearing utterly devastated by the situation. The search for Alicia became one of the most extensive operations in Ontario's history. Every difficult-to-reach ravine and marshy area was scoured, but no clues, leads, or even hints about the missing woman's location were found. Her parents also appealed to the public through the media, expressing their belief that their daughter was alive but being held against her will somewhere. They implored whoever had their daughter to let her return home unharmed and not to harm her in any way. Sean's lack of an alibi led the police to lean towards the theory that someone Alicia knew personally had abducted and possibly ended her life. This hypothesis was supported by the lack of signs of struggle, no evidence of forced entry, and the gate being left open. However, no concrete leads were found. The cigarettes found on the ground bore only a heavily smeared fingerprint, which couldn't be identified. Investigators thoroughly checked Alicia's contacts and reviewed all calls and messages on her phone and email, yet nothing suspicious was uncovered. On the 6th day of the search, the case was officially reclassified as a criminal act, despite the lack of evidence. Sean remained the prime suspect. Sean lived alone in his own house, located about 10 miles from Alicia's home. After realizing that public suspicion had intensified following his media appearance, he stopped participating in the search and refused to speak with the press. Investigators interviewed Sean 3 more times, but his story remained consistent. He was then offered a lie detector test, which he refused, convincing the police even more firmly that he was involved in the crime. 2 weeks after the disappearance, Sean was arrested on an unrelated charge. He was taken into custody late at night for driving under the influence and resisting arrest. Speculations arose that he was attempting to drown his guilt in alcohol. Following Sean's arrest, Alicia's parents gave another interview, sharing that they had not personally known the young man and only knew about him through their daughter's accounts. They believed she was happy, but now they considered the possibility that their daughter might have withheld certain details to avoid upsetting them, though she had planned to introduce her boyfriend to her family soon. Police interviewed Sean's neighbors to determine if they had noticed anything unusual recently, such as him disposing of large trash bags, behaving suspiciously, leaving unexpectedly, or cleaning his car. However, no significant information emerged from these inquiries. Detectives were left hoping that Sean might eventually confess to everything. About a month after Alicia's disappearance, the media attention surrounding her case began to fade. The search continued, but it was no longer prominently featured in newspapers or news broadcasts, and the investigation seemed to have reached a dead end. The only option left for law enforcement was to keep pressuring Sean, hoping he would eventually confess to the crime. Then, a completely unexpected development occurred in the case on September 20th, 2005, more than a month after Alicia's disappearance. 31-year-old Daniel Silvestre, a local resident, called the police and confessed to ending the girl's life, revealing where he had hidden her body. It's important to note that this man had not been under suspicion previously, and the police had not considered him at all during their initial investigation. At first, it appeared that the man merely sought fame and attention, and had decided to take responsibility for the most notorious case in recent years. However, all doubts were dispelled when the police discovered the girl's body at the location he had specified. Daniel Silvestre was an unemployed recluse who lived in his mother's house, which was adjacent to the Ross family home. The two properties were separated by overgrown shrubs, creating a nearly impenetrable barrier. Despite living virtually side by side for their entire lives, Daniel and the victim had never interacted before. Alicia had seen Daniel on his property a few times and considered him mentally unwell due to his strange behavior. The police had not shown an interest in Daniel earlier, as he seemed to be a reclusive and isolated individual who had not drawn attention to himself. Daniel had significant social challenges from a young age. He struggled to make friends, was ridiculed at school, and every effort to form relationships ended in complete failure, leading him to develop a deep resentment towards women. As a child, girls would call him a loser and say they would never associate with someone like him. At age 8, Sylvester was diagnosed with a social behavioral disorder and had been under ongoing psychological treatment, but the therapy did not provide much improvement. In his teenage years, he confessed that he had fantasies of suddenly attacking and overpowering a girl, which excited him. However, specialists were confident that these fantasies would remain just that and not manifest into real actions. After finishing school, Daniel stopped attending therapy sessions, decided not to continue his education, and became a recluse. He lived in his mother's house, isolating himself from the outside world, spending his days sitting in his room, often on adult websites, and occasionally venturing out in the evenings to secretly watch his neighbors, peeping into their windows. He particularly enjoyed watching when someone was engaged in sexual activity, as the spectacle excited him, yet Daniel remained a virgin well into his 30s, satisfying his desires through solitary activities. The neighbors hardly ever saw him, and thus considered him a harmless guy. Initially, Sylvester claimed that the girl's death was accidental, and he hid the body to avoid punishment. According to him, when he realized the girl showed no signs of life, he placed her in the trunk of his mother's car and drove about 50 miles out of town, hiding the body in a bushy ravine by the side of a country road. 3 weeks later, fearing that the body would be discovered, he moved it in the middle of the night even further away to a deserted area. The body was found in the place Daniel indicated, thereby dispelling the last doubts about his guilt. However, the condition of the remains indicated that the girl had been dealt with extreme cruelty. The injuries were such that it looked as if she had been hit by a car. An autopsy showed that Alicia had nearly all her ribs broken, her neck and both arms, and also suffered extensive closed cranial trauma with internal bleeding. The exact cause of death could not be determined, but at least 3 injuries were incompatible with life. Forensic experts were shocked, as they had never encountered anything like it before. It was necessary to clarify the circumstances and chronology of events on that fateful evening to determine how exactly the girl received her injuries. The convict initially claimed that he had an argument with his neighbor on a bush-covered path between their homes. During the verbal altercation, the neighbor called him a loser, which angered him, and he struck her on the head. When she fell, he kicked her several times in the chest. Realizing she was not breathing, he decided to hide the body and then moved it again when the search area expanded. However, there were missing details and specifics in his story that did not add up. It was unclear what Daniel was doing at his neighbor's house at night, why they began arguing, and what caused such a brutal beating. The evidence found at the scene was laid out in a straight line, making it challenging to reconstruct the full sequence of events. The investigation revealed that Sylvester had gone out to observe his neighbors. He noticed that Alicia's boyfriend had come over, and he approached their house closely as the couple was being intimate. He watched them from a window, then moved back to the bushes but did not leave. As midnight approached, the lovers went outside and kissed by the gate, just a couple of feet away from the observing neighbor. When Sean left, the girl returned to the yard and noticed Daniel. She became very angry, realizing that he had been spying on her and her boyfriend all this time. She started yelling at him, calling him a pervert and demanding that he leave immediately. Finally, Alicia called him a loser, which acted as a trigger for Sylvester, as that was exactly what other girls had called him during his childhood. Filled with rage, Sylvester punched the girl forcefully on the head and knocked her to the ground. She tried to resist and grabbed her attacker's hair, but he began to choke her. When his grip loosened, Daniel quickly stood up and began kicking Alicia while she was lying down, primarily striking her chest, back, neck, and head. Forensic experts later counted 33 fractures on the victim's body and extensive internal bleeding. When the man realized his neighbor was dead, he moved her body to his garage, undressed her, and then masturbated to relieve the tension, according to his testimony. The examination confirmed that Sylvester did not violate the body. He then placed the corpse in the trunk of his mother's car and took it to a remote location outside the city. Upon returning home, the criminal took a shower, changed clothes, and behaved as if nothing had happened. His clothes, the victim's belongings, and the towels he used to clean the crime scene were packed in trash bags and disposed of. The trial and sentencing proceedings began only in April 2007, at which time new details were made public. The defendant confessed that he had ended his neighbor's life, but he and his lawyer insisted that it was unintentional. The defense demanded a psychiatric evaluation, arguing that Daniel was mentally ill and should not be held accountable for his actions, suggesting he be treated in a clinic instead of being incarcerated. However, the prosecution argued that despite his mental illness and anger management issues, Sylvester acted with full knowledge of the consequences of his actions. He kicked the girl mercilessly with all his might, knowing it would likely result in her death. The court-ordered psychiatric evaluation confirmed that the defendant could indeed be considered fully responsible for his actions. Regarding the items found in the backyard, Daniel never admitted to having placed them there, arranged in a straight line. On May 7, 2007, the defendant was found guilty of a second-degree crime and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 16 years. A year later, Canadian singer-songwriter Kathleen Edwards wrote a song titled Alicia Ross, which portrayed the events from the young woman's perspective during the final moments of her life. Kelsey Barth was born on September 15, 1989 in Moses Lake, Washington. She grew up on a farm with her parents and older brother, helping with all kinds of chores from a young age. She loved working on the farm, but what fascinated her most were the crop-dusting planes, those small aircraft that sprayed fields or scattered seeds. Kelsey had always dreamed of flying one, and as soon as she graduated high school, she enrolled in a local college to become a pilot. After earning her license, she got a job as a flight instructor while still helping her parents on the farm. Teaching people how to fly and working with her family kept her busy, but more than anything, dreamed of having a family of her own. In 2016, when Kelsey was 27, she finally got the chance to start the family she'd always dreamed of. She met a man named Patrick online and they hit it off right away. Like Kelsey, he was a farmer and he shared her desire to have a big family. They talked for months before Kelsey decided to move to Colorado to be with him, and around the same time they got engaged. Shortly after settling in, she landed a job as a flight instructor at a prestigious aviation school that specialized in training military pilots. It was a great opportunity, but there was one downside. The school was in another city, about 70 miles from Patrick's farm. Because of the long commute, Kelsey rented a place in town called Woodland Park. It was closer to work, but still within a reasonable distance from Patrick's home. Even though they had to live apart, they spent as much time together as possible and their relationship moved quickly. In early 2017, Kelsey found out that she was pregnant and soon after, the couple welcomed a baby girl. It seemed like Kelsey's dream of having a family was finally coming true. But not long after their daughter was born, things between her and Patrick started to fall apart. She noticed he was growing distant, pulling away from her, losing interest in their relationship and showing less and less enthusiasm about their life together. Still, Kelsey wasn't ready to give up. She was determined to make things work and did everything she could to fix their relationship. On the morning of November 22, 2018, Thanksgiving Day, Kelsey planned to cook dinner for the holiday. She called her mom that morning, chatting about her plans and mentioning that she was heading to the grocery store to pick up ingredients for the meal. Over the next few days, Kelsey sent a few text messages to her mom, but then out of nowhere she stopped responding. At first, her mother assumed she was just busy. After all, Kelsey had a job and a 1-year-old daughter to take care of. But as the days passed and Kelsey continued to ignore calls and messages, her mom started to worry. Nearly a week had gone by without a single word from her. Growing increasingly concerned, she reached out to her older brother, hoping he had heard from Kelsey, but he said she hadn't responded to him either. Desperate for answers, Kelsey's mother decided to call Patrick, thinking he might know what was going on, but his response only made things more confusing. He claimed that he and Kelsey had broken up. According to Patrick, their breakup happened on Thanksgiving, more than a week earlier. He claimed that before the holiday, Kelsey told him she needed some time alone and wanted to end their relationship. Then on Thanksgiving Day, She supposedly dropped off their daughter with him, took some of her things from his place, and he hadn't heard from her since. Kelsey's mother found his story hard to believe. For one, she couldn't imagine her daughter leaving her 1-year-old child behind without checking in, even once. And second, she had spoken to Kelsey on the very same day Patrick claimed all of this happened. Kelsey never mentioned a breakup. In fact, she had seemed completely fine. She was in good spirits and excited about cooking Thanksgiving dinner. Feeling uneasy, Kelsey's mom asked Patrick to go to her house and check on her. He agreed, but said he needed to finish up some work on the farm first. But the call never came. He never followed up. At that point, Kelsey's mother knew something wasn't right, so she made the decision to contact the police. She explained the situation, and the local department sent an officer to check her home. When they arrived, they found Kelsey's car parked outside, but there was no sign of her. No one answered the door, and since the police couldn't enter without a warrant, there wasn't much they could do. All they could tell Kelsey's mom was that her daughter wasn't there. However, officers did speak with Patrick, and he stuck to the same story. Kelsey had supposedly left him, saying she needed space, but this time he added a new detail. She had taken some of her things from his house, including her handgun. He claimed she had been acting strangely in the days before she disappeared. Said he was worried she might have done something drastic. The police asked for access to Kelsey's home, and what they found inside only raised more questions. All of her belongings were still there, her clothes, documents, and other essentials she would have taken if she had left on her own. But one thing was missing: her car keys. Her car was parked outside, yet the keys were nowhere to be found. That didn't make much sense. It was hard to imagine a scenario where Kelsey would take her keys but leave her vehicle behind. At this point, the local police department decided to officially open an investigation into her disappearance. One of the first steps was obtaining data from her phone. When investigators checked its GPS history, they found that the last signal from Kelsey's phone had been recorded on November 25th, 3 days after she was last seen. It came from a small town called Gooding. The problem was that Gooding was in Idaho, about 800 miles from Kelsey's home. That didn't add up. When police spoke with her family, they confirmed that Kelsey had no friends, relatives, or any known connections there. They had no idea why she would have gone to such a remote place. Detectives reached out to law enforcement and Gooding for assistance, but their search turned up nothing. In such a small town, a newcomer would have stood out, yet there were no traces of Kelsey. That was odd, and investigators knew they needed to look elsewhere for answers. They reviewed CCTV footage from the grocery store Kelsey had visited on Thanksgiving. The video showed her acting completely normal. There was nothing unusual about her behavior. She wasn't in a hurry, didn't seem distressed, and certainly didn't look like someone planning to disappear. She picked up groceries for dinner and even bought a flower before leaving the store. Police conducted another search of Kelsey's home, but once again, they found no clues. Days passed without any breakthroughs, and in that time, Kelsey's mother and brother flew to Colorado to help with the search. They stayed at her house, and right away, her mother had an unsettling feeling. Something just didn't seem right, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Then one day, Kelsey's older brother went to use the bathroom and happened to notice something red on the inside of the toilet. Caught his attention, and when he looked closer, he realized it could be blood. He immediately reported it to the police, and tests confirmed his suspicion. It was human blood. But this discovery was just the beginning. Investigators had already searched the house once, but their examination had been fairly basic. This time, forensics decided to use luminol, a chemical that reveals traces of blood, even if it has been wiped away or cleaned to the point of being invisible to the human eye. They started spraying luminol in the bathroom, and what they saw was truly chilling. There was blood everywhere. It had been cleaned under the chemical reaction. It lit up across the walls and floor. The same thing happened in the living room. There were large stains of wiped away blood, revealing a gruesome scene that had been carefully scrubbed from sight. Samples were sent to the lab, and the results confirmed what investigators feared most. The blood belonged to Kelsey, but there was something else. Among the samples, forensic experts discovered 2 additional DNA profiles, one belonging to a man, the other to a woman. At this point, detectives were almost certain Kelsey was no longer alive. Their focus now shifted to identifying the two unknown individuals whose DNA had been found in her home. Naturally, Patrick became the prime suspect. Investigators had already found his version of events suspicious, but now that they were almost certain Kelsey was dead, their doubts about him only grew stronger. When they got access to Patrick's phone, they saw that he had been calling and texting Kelsey up until November 25th, the day she stopped responding to everyone else. Their messages mostly revolved around their breakup, but there was nothing particularly useful in the exchange. However, detectives were already leaning toward a different timeline. They believed Kelsey had actually been killed on Thanksgiving, November 22nd. The problem was that aside from those text messages, there was no real evidence that she had been alive for the next 3 days. That raised a terrifying possibility. Kelsey might have been murdered shortly after returning home from the grocery store, and if that was the case, someone else had been using her phone to send those messages. That's when detectives noticed something interesting. Patrick had repeatedly called a phone number with a Gooding area code, both before and after Kelsey disappeared. Wanting to know more, they traced the number and found that it belonged to a woman named Crystal. Investigators called her and asked how she knew Patrick. Crystal explained that they were essentially business partners. They co-owned several horses. When asked when she had last seen him, she initially claimed she couldn't remember, but after some hesitation, she admitted that they were supposed to meet right after Thanksgiving. According to her, she and Patrick had planned to buy another horse, so she drove to Colorado to see it herself. However, along the way, she found out that Patrick didn't have enough money for the purchase, so she turned around and went back home. Considering that the drive from her town to Patrick's was almost 1,000 miles, detectives found Crystal's story suspicious. It seemed unlikely that someone would embark on such a long road trip just to see a new horse. Adding to their doubts, Crystal claimed she hadn't even used her own car for the trip. Instead, she had borrowed a friend's vehicle because it was more fuel efficient. That detail felt oddly specific, almost as if she was trying to justify why her car wouldn't show up on any traffic cameras or toll records. Before ending the conversation, detectives asked Crystal if she knew Kelsey. She responded that she had heard about her on the news but had never met her in person. That statement immediately raised red flags. Crystal lived in another state, and at that point, Kelsey's disappearance hadn't yet made national headlines. So how would she have already heard about it? After wrapping up their call with Crystal, investigators decided to dig deeper into her background. They discovered that she had recently gone through a divorce, so they reached out to her ex-husband, hoping he could provide more insight. When detectives asked Crystal's ex-husband if he knew Patrick, his response completely contradicted what Crystal had told them. He revealed that she and Patrick had known each other since 2006. Patrick was actually her first love. Over the years, they had an on and off relationship, but had always stayed in touch. Even more suspicious, her ex-husband claimed that their affair had never truly ended, not even after he and Crystal got married. According to him, she was still seeing Patrick in 2017, the same year he got engaged to Kelsey. But that wasn't all. Crystal had also lied to her ex-husband about her whereabouts after Thanksgiving. At first, she told him she had gone to visit friends from November 24th to 25th, but after the police contacted her, she finally admitted to him that she had actually been in Colorado. Then came another suspicious detail. On December 4th, Crystal asked her ex-husband to go with her to buy a new phone, claiming she had lost hers. Detectives immediately took note of the timing. December 4th was the exact same day they had obtained Patrick's phone for investigation. With all this information, investigators had enough evidence to obtain a warrant for Crystal's DNA sample. They flew to Idaho to collect it, and while Crystal complied with the request, she flat out refused to answer any of their questions. As they waited for the lab results, detectives reached out to the friend who had lent Crystal her car for the trip to Colorado. She allowed them to inspect the vehicle and mentioned that she kept a handgun inside. When investigators checked the gun, they noticed something alarming. One bullet was missing from the magazine. The friend was adamant that the gun had been fully loaded when she lent Crystal the car, and she had no idea where the missing bullet had gone. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. Investigators then spoke with another one of Crystal's friends, a woman named Michelle, and what she told them completely turned the case on its head. Michelle revealed that Crystal had called her in late October, about a month before Kelsey disappeared, and told her something shocking. Through tears, Crystal confided that Patrick had asked her to kill his fiancée. According to Michelle, Patrick told Crystal that Kelsey was mistreating their daughter. He insisted that he couldn't do it himself because it would be too obvious and he needed someone else to carry out the murder. During the conversation, Michelle urged Crystal to go to the police, but she never did. This revelation completely changed the course of the investigation. Police were now almost certain that both Patrick and Crystal were somehow involved in Kelsey's murder. But despite the mounting evidence, they still had no DNA results and, more importantly, no concrete proof of what had actually happened to Kelsey. As investigators continued searching for more evidence, the case took another unexpected turn. Crystal called them and said that she had hired a lawyer and was ready to talk. When detectives met with her, she didn't hesitate and dropped a bombshell. Crystal admitted that Patrick had killed Kelsey and confessed to cleaning up the crime scene afterward. According to Crystal, Patrick had been planning Kelsey's murder for months, but from the very beginning, he had intended for Crystal to be the one to carry it out. Just as she had told her friend Michelle, Patrick repeatedly insisted that Kelsey was abusing their daughter, using drugs and drinking excessively. He convinced Crystal that getting rid of her was the only option. Crystal agreed to help Patrick, and 2 months before Kelsey's disappearance, they came up with her first plan. The idea was simple. Crystal would poison Kelsey's favorite coffee with some medication. Since Crystal was a nurse, she had easy access to the necessary drugs. But there was one big problem. Crystal and Kelsey had never met. To get around this, she and Patrick came up with a cover story. Crystal would pretend to be a new neighbor who had just moved to the area and was introducing herself to the locals. In September, she put their plan into motion. She grabbed Kelsey's favorite coffee, went to her house, and knocked on the door. When Kelsey answered, they made small talk for a few minutes before Crystal handed her the drink and said goodbye. But Crystal actually couldn't go through with it. She hadn't poisoned the coffee. She just wanted to see Kelsey in person. And just like that, their first attempt failed. Patrick's next plan was more direct. Crystal was supposed to drive to his farm, pick up a metal pipe he had prepared, go to Kelsey's house, and kill her. She drove nearly 1,000 miles, picked up the pipe, and even pulled up outside Kelsey's house. But once again, she couldn't go through with it. She sat there for a while, then drove off without ever stepping out of the car. But Patrick didn't give up. His third plan was almost identical to the last one. But this time, instead of a pipe, he left a baseball bat for Crystal to use. Once again, she took the long drive, picked up the weapon, and approached Kelsey's house. And once again, she couldn't go through with it. At that point, Patrick realized if he wanted Kelsey dead, he would have to do it himself. According to Crystal, it all happened in the afternoon on Thanksgiving Day. Patrick showed up at Kelsey's house with a twisted plan. He told her he had bought several holiday-scented candles, suggested they play a game. She would be blindfolded and try to guess the different scents. Kelsey went along with it, completely unaware of what was about to happen. As soon as Patrick tied the blindfold over her eyes, he grabbed the baseball bat and carried out the murder. What made it even more horrifying was that their 1-year-old daughter was in the next room the entire time. After killing Kelsey, Patrick placed her body in a large plastic container and loaded it into the trunk of his car. Then, as if nothing had happened, he took his daughter and drove to his family's Thanksgiving dinner. While his relatives gathered around the table laughing and celebrating, Kelsey's body sat just a few yards away, hidden inside his vehicle. After dinner, Patrick drove out to a small town called Cripple Creek, where he had rented a barn and left Kelsey's body there for several days. That same night, he called Crystal and told her she needed to come and clean up the mess he had made. She immediately understood. Kelsey was dead. Trying to cover her tracks, Crystal borrowed her friend's car, thinking it might help throw off investigators if the police ever looked into it. She then gathered a stash of cleaning supplies and set off for Colorado. While she was on the road, Patrick called her again. This time, he had a specific request. He warned her to be extra careful because he couldn't find one of Kelsey's teeth. He didn't want it turning up somewhere it shouldn't, especially not in front of Kelsey's family. When Crystal stepped into Kelsey's home, she was met with a horrifying scene. There was blood everywhere. It covered the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. She spent over 4 hours scrubbing the place, but some stains were impossible to remove, even with heavy-duty cleaning chemicals. So, she gathered anything that had blood on it, rags, towels, and other items, stuffed them into garbage bags, and loaded them into her car. After finishing the cleanup, she casually stopped at a cafe for something to eat before heading to meet Patrick. They stopped at a gas station where Patrick filled up a canister with gasoline. Then, they drove to the barn, retrieved Kelsey's body, and took it back to Patrick's farm. There, they built a fire and burned her remains. As they stood by the flames, Patrick's mother stepped outside. She watched them for a while, but whether she realized what was really happening remains unknown. Before Crystal left for home, Patrick handed her Kelsey's phone. For the next few days, she responded to texts from Kelsey's family and friends, trying to keep up the illusion that Kelsey was still alive. But eventually, she got rid of the phone, destroying the last trace of Kelsey's connection to the outside world. Despite helping Patrick cover up a brutal murder, Crystal insisted that she hadn't acted of her own free will. She claimed she had been terrified of becoming his next victim and only did what he asked out of fear for her life and for her children's lives. She said Patrick had threatened to harm them if she didn't cooperate. Before ending her confession, Crystal added that she had actually tried to help police catch Patrick. She claimed that she had deliberately left a few bloodstains in Kelsey's home, hoping investigators would find them. Detectives were highly skeptical of this claim. Crystal had countless opportunities to go to the police and prevent the murder. Instead, she not only allowed Patrick to go through with it, but had been willing to kill Kelsey herself 3 separate times. And even after Patrick carried out the murder, she didn't come forward. She helped him clean up the crime scenes, dispose of the body, and mislead Kelsey's family and friends. In the end, her confession wasn't motivated by guilt or a sense of justice. The truth was, her lawyer had advised her to take a plea deal, one that would drop all charges against her except for a single count of evidence tampering related to destroying Kelsey's phone. Despite Crystal's detailed confession, police still needed solid physical evidence to take the case to trial. They had already searched Patrick's farm once and found nothing incriminating. But this time, with Crystal's help, they returned to the property, and she pointed out the exact spot where they had burned Kelsey's remains. Patrick had done a thorough job of covering it up, so investigators had to dig through layers of dirt and ash. Eventually, forensic experts uncovered traces of a burned body. However, there was almost nothing left that could be used for DNA analysis. The only piece of evidence was the tooth Crystal had found while cleaning up the crime scene. But even that was so badly damaged by fire, investigators couldn't conclusively prove it belonged to Kelsey. Still, there was one crucial breakthrough. By this time, the lab results from the DNA samples found in Kelsey's home had come in. The results confirmed what detectives already suspected. The 2 unidentified profiles belonged to Patrick and Crystal. That was the final piece of evidence they needed. Patrick was eventually arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He spent the next years behind bars while prosecutors built their case against him, refusing to admit any guilt. According to the prosecution, Patrick had multiple motives for wanting Kelsey dead. First, their relationship was falling apart and he wanted nothing more to do with her. But since they had a child together, simply walking away wasn't an option, so he decided to get rid of her permanently. The second motive was financial. Patrick was struggling with some serious money problems and was at risk of losing part of his farming business. Investigators believe this could have also played a role in his decision to kill Kelsey. Even though prosecutors couldn't pinpoint a single clear-cut motive, by the time of the trial, investigators had gathered undeniable proof of Patrick's guilt. One of the biggest pieces of evidence came from his phone records. Data from his smartphone showed that he had spent several hours at Kelsey's home on the day of her murder. This directly contradicted his claim that he had only stopped by for a few minutes to pick up their daughter and drop off some of her belongings. CCTV footage from a neighbor's house further discredited his story. The video showed Patrick arriving at Kelsey's home with their daughter, but instead of leaving shortly after, as he claimed, he didn't come back outside for several hours. Then came another damning detail. After leaving Kelsey's home, Patrick's phone traveled to his farm, but Kelsey's phone moved with him. He hadn't even bothered to turn it off. For the next few days, Kelsey's phone remained near Patrick's, tracking alongside his movements until he finally handed it off to Crystal, who had used it to send misleading texts before destroying it. On top of all this, detectives uncovered a wealth of surveillance footage linking Patrick to the crime. One camera captured him driving with the large plastic container, the same one he later used to hide Kelsey's body. Another camera at the gas station recorded him and Crystal filling up a gas canister, further confirming their involvement in destroying the remains. Then, during the trial, another disturbing detail came to light. An employee at a mobile carrier store testified that Patrick had come in on the same day police confiscated his phone, asking a very suspicious question. He wanted to know how to remotely wipe all data from a device. But perhaps the most damning testimony came from someone inside the jail. One of Patrick's cellmates revealed that, while awaiting trial, Patrick had made a hit list. On it were 3 names: Crystal, her ex-husband, and Kelsey's mother. He wanted them dead. All of this left no doubt Patrick wasn't just guilty, but he was still dangerous. Given the overwhelming evidence against him, along with Crystal's testimony, the jury unanimously found Patrick guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 156 years. As for Crystal, her plea deal got her an incredibly lenient sentence, just 3 years in prison. But a judge later reduced it to 18 months, with the possibility of early release after only a year. In the end, she served barely any time and has been free for a long time, despite the fact that she could have stopped the crime, but instead she helped cover it up. On a more hopeful note, Kelsey's family was granted full custody of her daughter, and she has been living with them ever since. In honor of Kelsey's passion for flying, her parents also established a nonprofit that provides support to aspiring pilots, ensuring that her legacy lives on. The case of Nordal Leland. On August 26, 2017, in Le Pont de Beauvoisin, Isère, a wedding ceremony was taking place. During the ceremony, no one realized that a stranger had quietly appeared and joined in the joyful atmosphere. He only knew a few people at the ceremony, and he seemed to have his own plans. Among the guests was 8-year-old Miles Araujo. While everyone was having fun, their mood suddenly changed when Meade disappeared. This made her family panic. They searched but could not find her. They contacted the police for help. Soon after, the police team arrived and began the search. They searched the entire area and all possible locations she might have gone to. Search dogs and a helicopter from nearby Grenoble were deployed, and additional support was called in. Meade was not the first child to go missing in the area. Between 2007 and 2017, there were numerous disappearances, many of which went unreported or were closed without any leads. No one knows what happened to these children. It is likely that one or more individuals are the perpetrators. The incident left everyone in France very worried. Parents handed out flyers, and local shopkeepers put up posters of Meade in their storefronts. The community was aware of previous disappearances in the area, and so were the local gendarmes. However, at first, no one connected Meade's disappearance to the earlier cases. Despite rumors of a serial killer, the police had yet to apprehend a suspect for a decade. This was because these criminals often operated according to a certain pattern. The missing individuals seemed to vanish without a trace, and most search efforts yielded no results. When Meade disappeared, people began to wonder if all these cases could be linked. This raised another pressing question. Why had the authorities been unable to find any clues until now? This has caused public outrage, and they have accused the police of ineffectiveness. 5 days after Meade went missing, the police had no leads. Detectives tried to comfort her family, but they knew the chances of finding her alive were very low given the time that had passed. Then a man named Ludovic came forward. He was a guest at the wedding and believed he had important information for the investigation. Ludovic was a close friend of 30-year-old Nordal Leland's. Ludovic explained that he had crashed the wedding. He didn't have an invitation but attended in place of his cousin who was invited but could not come. His behavior seemed suspicious to the other guests, but they assumed he was just drunk. He eventually agreed to go back to the table, but then vanished. Nordal was so intelligent that even Meade's mother did not realize something was wrong until it was too late. Ludovic thought Nordal should be investigated. Although they had only briefly met, he had gained the trust of many guests. Throughout the evening, he had come across as friendly and approachable. Meade's mother even had a brief chat with him about her family's 3 dogs. He later offered to show Meade's his dogs, which made her mother let her guard down. Her mother later admitted that she never thought her child would get into a car with a complete stranger in the middle of the night without telling her parents. There were a lot of people present, so it was puzzling that Meade's could disappear without anyone noticing. The kidnapper clearly took steps to hide their actions. One guest recalled seeing Meade's exit through the back door alone. Her parents last saw her around 2:30 a.m. When they realized she was missing, they immediately began searching for her. By that time, Nordal had already left, but soon returned. He approached Meade's mother, expressing surprise at the situation. When she asked if he had seen her daughter, he calmly said he had no idea where she was. He offered to help with the search, but then claimed he felt sick from the wine he had consumed. In another case, Eric Fry, 48, moved to Le Pont de Beauvoisin, Isère with his girlfriend in 2016. They had a serious relationship and big plans for the future. However, shortly after moving in, Eric suddenly disappeared. He walked to a bakery just 15 minutes from their home, but never returned. He left his belongings behind and took only a bank card, which suggested he would return soon. His girlfriend and a neighbor searched the area but couldn't reach him by phone. After several hours of searching, his girlfriend went to the police station to report him missing. Unfortunately, the officers were skeptical and advised her to wait 48 hours before filing an official report, reasoning that he was an adult who could have left on his own, not wanting to wait long. She initiated her own investigation and requested CCTV footage from the bakery. The video showed Eric buying bread and chatting briefly with the cashier. It was clear he disappeared on his way home. She then contacted the police again, but they still found nothing. A year later, in 2017, she came across a news report about another disappearance, Meade's disappearance. She immediately thought that her boyfriend's case and Meade's case might be connected, potentially involve the same perpetrator. Eric's girlfriend believed that the bakery's surveillance cameras could provide a vital clue to the case. The police examined the footage and compared it to the wedding guest list to find any matches. During the investigation, a witness, Erica, provided information suggesting Nordal's possible involvement in the case, and this information was reported in the media. She studied his photo carefully for a while. She then reviewed the videos and noticed a striking resemblance that seemed more than just a coincidence. At the same time, France was facing a serious problem. The number of disappearances was increasing. This rise had made the public worried and angry, as it seemed that criminals were becoming bolder. In Chamboury, about 4 months before Meade's disappearance, the body of 20-year-old Arthur Neuer was found in a river and was determined to have drowned. However, his family disagreed with that conclusion from the inquest. The police discovered that from April 11th to 12th, 2017, Arthur had left a local nightclub around 1 a.m. The last person to see him was the nightclub manager who observed him walking toward the barracks. Since the distance was quite far, Arthur decided to walk along the road, hoping someone would give him a ride. The manager witnessed him flag down a car and get in after asking for a ride. However, he never arrived at his military unit the next morning, leading to his classification as a deserter. Authorities found a trail hundreds of meters from where Arthur got into the car. After reviewing surveillance footage, they uncovered a lead. The car that picked him up had been parked near the nightclub for hours, with the driver apparently waiting for someone. When Arthur appeared on the road, the driver drove off to give him a ride. This raised suspicions, but they could not identify the make or license plate of the car. This was the only lead in the search for Arthur until his body was eventually discovered in the river. His family firmly rejected the idea that he would have deserted the military, as he was passionate about his work and wanted to pursue a military career. Arthur had no prior legal issues. He was generally a friendly person with no history of running away, mental health disorders, or addictions. He also had no conflicts with anyone. Strangely, the police initially took no action. They didn't even examine Arthur's mobile phone until much later, when the search operation began. It was discovered that he had been near a roundabout at 3 a.m., close to a nightclub. Just 4 minutes later, his phone was found 6 kilometers away, and 5 minutes after that, it was located 11 kilometers from the roundabout. Given the time and distance, it was clear that Arthur had been in the kidnapper's car during this period. This information led investigators to identify the mobile phone of the driver. The phone belonged to Nordal Leland, who was driving an Audi A3 at the time. Unfortunately, the nightclub manager who saw the car stop couldn't accurately identify its make. The car was searched, but Nordal denied any involvement in the kidnapping and appeared arrogant. He seemed to feel uncatchable, a trait often found in serial killers. During interrogation, he spoke confidently, demonstrating impressive powers of persuasion. The detectives who worked with him were taken aback. They had difficulty extracting any information from him. Just a few hours after Arthur disappeared, Nordal visited a car wash where he spent over 2 hours cleaning the interior and exterior of his car. His behavior raised suspicions. He was supposedly preparing the car for sale, meticulously removing any stains. Surveillance footage from the car wash showed that he focused particularly on the front passenger seat, spending about half an hour on it. Additionally, he took all the napkins and rags he used for cleaning with him, instead of discarding them in the car wash's trash, which also seemed odd. Nordal insisted that his actions were normal and justified by his preparations for the car sale. Nordal has 3 large dogs, which cause hair and dirt to accumulate in the interior of his car. He likely realized that the detectives had no solid evidence against him, allowing him to manipulate the situation to his advantage. During questioning, he remained calm, delivering clear and convincing answers, all while accompanied by his lawyer. Despite his suspicions, the police released him due to lack of evidence, and they continued to investigate further. They later discovered that he was actively posting on social media, sharing content that included videos of himself with illegal substances. He openly claimed to be involved in the sale and use of these banned substances on his profiles. As it turns out, Nordal Leland has a criminal record, having been arrested in 2009 for theft and vandalism. However, he was well-liked and described by many as a good person. Friends and acquaintances would never have suspected that he could be a serial killer. He was very good at charming people, which probably helped him gain their trust. Sadly, this ability may have contributed to the disappearance of his 13th victim, Lucy Rue. She had been missing for 5 years before Meade disappeared. At 34, she was receiving treatment for phobias at a local psychiatric clinic. She attended therapy during the day and returned home in the evening. One September morning, she left home without any identification or personal belongings and was never seen again. Like other cases, the investigation into Lucy's disappearance found no leads. It seemed she had vanished without a trace. By the end of 2017, Lucy's sister, Natalie, was already aware of Nordal. She immediately suspected a link between him and Lucy's disappearance after discovering that Lucy had gone missing in roughly the same area where another victim was later found. Unfortunately, just as in previous cases, law enforcement did not take Lucy's case seriously, possibly because of her mental health issues. Years later, investigators finally tracked down a person who was with Lucy at the psychiatric clinic. They discovered that Nordal was also there for treatment during that time. The two often shared meals in the cafeteria. A witness said he was particularly attentive to her. She was the 13th victim and was described as a beautiful girl who managed to attract his attention. Soon after, she disappeared without a trace. Police began to notice a pattern as they investigated. It became clear that the missing people were related to the neighborhood where Nordal lived. The attacks occurred within a 25-kilometer radius of his home. Most of the victims were local residents or tourists visiting nearby areas, and many of them knew each other. Nordal appeared in several cases, including the disappearance of an elderly woman named Georgette, a person who went missing while walking. He even actively participated in the search, volunteering to help find her. However, there was not enough evidence to charge him. Finally, the detectives began to investigate further. One officer spent hours reviewing footage from the car wash and noticed Nordal's unusual behavior while cleaning his car. He focused on the trunk of the car, spending 47 minutes there, which aroused suspicion. The car was seized again for a detailed examination. To conduct a thorough analysis, all the interior panels were removed, and investigators spent many hours inspecting the vehicle. They eventually discovered blood stains on the wiring in the trunk. DNA testing confirmed the blood was Melissa's, raising questions about how it got into the car. The time had come to question Nordal again and confront him with difficult questions. He was detained once more and brought in for interrogation. From the very beginning, he seemed prepared for the interrogation. He displayed confidence and arrogance, but his demeanor changed when asked about the blood in the trunk. Faced with undeniable evidence, he confessed within a few hours. He admitted that he left the wedding with Meade because he promised to show her his dogs. He claimed the incident was accidental. He said she began to cry for no reason, which frustrated him. In his anger, he struck her hard on the head, resulting in her immediate death. Police then conducted a thorough search and reviewed surveillance camera footage. The investigation focused on recordings from 247 cameras located along the street. They saw video footage of the car carrying Nordal and Meade. In the footage, she appears frightened, pressing against the locked door, trying to get away from Nordal. Other recordings show him getting out of the car, seemingly lost in thought, while she is motionless and possibly dead. Nordal eventually agrees to reveal where he hid Meade's body. However, when they arrived at a remote area near an abandoned factory, he began to act confused and pretended to forget where he had buried her. He led the police in circles for nearly an entire day, and by evening, he still had not disclosed the burial site. Eventually, they found her skull and her clothing. At that moment, he suddenly knelt down and cried loudly. However, his expression seemed insincere. However, the investigation by law enforcement was just beginning. They discovered that Nordal had left the wedding with Meade at 2:46 a.m. and had put his cell phone on airplane mode to avoid being tracked. He was gone for less than an hour, during which he assaulted her, placed her body in the trunk of his car, and drove to an abandoned factory where he buried her. He then returned to the wedding and, at around 4 a.m., pretended to be drunk to create an alibi without arousing suspicion. Detectives noted a significant issue. He had too little time to accomplish everything he needed to do. This leads them to believe that he actually returned to the wedding with Meade's body still in the trunk. After coming back, he seemed anxious that the police might ask him to open the trunk. The discovery of Meade's body, however, did not provide many answers. By that time, it had completely decomposed, and only skeletal remains were found. The forensic expert could not determine the exact cause of death, and the injuries she sustained were impossible to evaluate. The forensic expert noted that she had a broken nose and jaw, but these injuries were not severe enough to cause death. There were no signs of weapon wounds on the bones, leading them to believe that Nordal may have acted out of anger when she screamed, causing him to lose control. In Arthur's case, Nordal admitted to killing Arthur on March 29th. He said that an argument had broken out in the car, which led to a fight, and Arthur fell out of the car. According to Nordal, the fall was the cause of death, and he considered it an accident. However, investigators had a different opinion. Although there may have been an argument between them, Nordal deliberately chose Arthur as his victim. That night, he was like a predator. He may have used sleeping pills to control Arthur, but there is not enough evidence to suggest he intended to kill beforehand. This led to the maximum sentence being 30 years instead of life. At the trial, on the prosecution side, a woman named Manic, who had actually escaped from Nordal, testified. She did not want to contact the police to report him because she feared for her safety. However, she ultimately decided to tell her story to help the prosecution put him away for a long time. According to her, at about 10 a.m., one day in July 2014, she arrived at a store where she saw a stranger in the parking lot. He was sitting in a dark Audi A3 and greeted her. She replied that she was not interested in making new acquaintances and entered the store to make her purchases. Manik realized that the man was constantly following her. He trailed her throughout the store but didn't purchase anything, raising her suspicions. When she left the store and went to another one, he followed her again. After leaving the second store, he still chased her by car, but the distance between them grew further and further. When she reached the police station, she asked for their help, believing that their intervention would save her from a dangerous situation. Unfortunately, the police showed little concern and felt powerless to act because there was no clear evidence of a crime. At home, Manik told her son the story, but it was only when she read about Nordal in the newspaper that she realized it was him. Numerous articles described his aggressive personality, including instances of domestic violence, stalking, and harassment. During the trial, Mealy's parents sought answers about their daughter's fate, ready to hear any truth, and they expected Nordal to provide a thorough account of the incident. However, he did not provide the truth, as all of his testimony contradicted what had actually happened. Nordal claimed he was in a panic and experiencing hallucinations, believing that the spirit of Arthur, one of his previous victims, had taken over his body, compelling him to kill Mealy's. However, his testimony was dismissed as not credible. The prosecution believes that abuse was the main motive behind Mealy's kidnapping, claiming that he abused and then killed her. Unfortunately, her body was badly decomposed, making it impossible for investigators to confirm these suspicions. On May 11, 2021, Nordal Leland was convicted of murdering Arthur Neuer and received a 20-year prison sentence. A year later, he was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering Mealy Araujo, resulting in a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 22 years. Nordal chose not to appeal his convictions, and authorities are still investigating his potential involvement in other cases. There are several leads, but direct evidence is scarce, and he has not confessed to any additional crimes. During his time in prison, Nordal took advantage of every opportunity he had. He discovered that prisoners in French prisons retain most rights except for release, and he began to exploit these privileges. He corresponded with women, charming them as he usually did, and they came to visit him using a secret phone. He communicated with teenagers and accessed adult websites. Overall, he created a comfortable life for himself in prison, complete with a refrigerator, TV, and game console. Despite this, Nordal confided in other inmates about his plan to escape at the end of the year. Ashley Meade was born on November 14, 1991 in the small town of Warren, Pennsylvania. She grew up in a big family surrounded by siblings. From an early age, Ashley had a deep love for all things creative. She was passionate about singing, poetry, and fashion. She was also a huge nature lover and always dreamed of traveling. Over the years, she explored almost every state in the US and even visited Canada and Mexico. After finishing high school, Ashley moved to New York to study liberal arts. Later, she transferred to Louisiana State University in Shreveport. That's where she met a guy named Adam, and the two started dating. For the next few years, Ashley stayed focused on her studies until her life took a sudden, devastating turn. She was in a serious car accident, which led to a long and difficult recovery. And even though she eventually managed to get back to her normal life, she now had a new problem: medical bills. The debt piled up during her treatment, and she had no choice but to drop out of school and start working full-time. Around that same time, things between her and Adam started falling apart. Eventually, the two decided to break up, but almost immediately after that, Ashley found out that she was pregnant. Despite everything she had been through in the past few years, she was overjoyed and couldn't wait to become a mom. She also wanted her child to grow up in a two-parent home, so she and Adam agreed to co-parent their daughter. By then, Adam had moved to Boulder, Colorado to study culinary arts and become a chef, and Ashley decided to follow him there. Ashley and Adam rented an apartment in a small residential complex, and before long, their daughter Winter Daisy was born. Even though they had decided not to get back together, they were both completely devoted to their little girl, sharing the responsibilities of raising her and giving her all their love. A few months after Winter was born, Ashley got a job as a teaching assistant at a preschool. Later, she joined an organization that helped children from low-income families get ready for school. The work was tough, but Ashley had a natural way with kids. They loved her from the start. This continued until February 2017. By then, Ashley was 25 years old, raising her 1-year-old daughter and working with kids. But on February 13th, she didn't show up for her shift. Her coworkers found it odd. They tried calling and texting her, but she never responded. The next day, when she missed work again, one of her colleagues decided to contact the police. She asked them to check on Ashley and her daughter to make sure that they were okay. The local police department sent officers to her apartment complex. As soon as they got there, they noticed a few strange things. The outdoor lights near the entrance were on, even though it was the middle of the day. The front door was unlocked, so the officers stepped inside. But there was no sign of Ashley, her daughter, or Adam. As they looked around, more red flags popped up. Ashley's belongings, her phone, driver's license, and purse were still inside, yet her car was missing from the parking lot, which didn't make sense. Then, in the kitchen, they found something even more unsettling. A half-cooked meal left in the oven, as if someone had started making dinner but, for some reason, never finished and never came back. All of this seemed suspicious, so the police decided to contact Ashley's parents. Her mother told them she hadn't heard from Ashley in days and had no idea where she might have gone. She also found it strange that Ashley had left her cat behind, something she never did. According to her mom, Ashley always took the cat with her wherever she traveled, no matter where she went. Desperate for answers, her mother started reaching out to family and friends, hoping someone had heard from Ashley, but no one had spoken to her in days. Meanwhile, the police tried calling Adam, but he wasn't answering either, and when investigators attempted to track his phone, they made another unsettling discovery. It had been turned off. As for Ashley's phone, the police handed it over to the experts, and they quickly uncovered several important clues. The data showed that the last time Ashley used her phone was on February 12th, 2 days before her coworker reported her missing. It was her day off, and she had spent it running errands with her daughter. She visited a few stores, picked out a new dress, and snapped some photos before heading home. After speaking with Ashley's neighbors, detectives were able to piece together more details about that evening. One neighbor recalled seeing her taking out the trash around 6 p.m. Then, sometime before 9 p.m., another neighbor heard a loud, heavy thud coming from Ashley's apartment. She thought it sounded like someone falling down the stairs, but after that, everything went silent and she didn't hear anything else. This detail caught the investigators' attention, especially since Ashley's phone activity had stopped right around 9 p.m. That made them suspect something bad might have happened to her at that exact moment. Soon, they got another lead. Data from her phone revealed that, shortly before her disappearance, Ashley had started dating a man named Harvey. Detectives went through their messages and found something interesting. His text gave off a suspicious vibe, and that was enough for police to want to talk to him in person. When officers showed up at Harvey's house, he allowed them to search the place without a warrant. He insisted he had no idea where Ashley was and claimed he hadn't spoken to her in days. According to him, on the night she vanished, he was hanging out with friends and his alibi checked out. They all confirmed his story. Harvey even let the police go through his phone and the data backed up his claims. So for now, he didn't seem to be involved. With Harvey ruled out as a suspect, detectives kept searching for new leads. Since they still hadn't found any trace of Ashley, decided to take a different approach, tracking down Adam's relatives in hopes of locating him. And that's when they finally caught a break. When investigators contacted Adam's parents in Louisiana, they revealed something interesting. Adam had stopped by their house just a day earlier on February 13th. According to his parents, Adam had arrived with his daughter, but without Ashley. They were completely caught off guard by his visit, especially since he hadn't told anyone he was coming. That alone seemed odd, considering the drive from Colorado to Louisiana was almost 1,000 miles. But Adam had a simple explanation. He claimed he had been planning the trip for a while so that his daughter could spend time with her relatives. Despite the surprise, his family was happy to see them. Adam stayed the night, and the next day he left for Arkansas to visit his grandmother. Detectives asked his relatives to reach out and tell him to call the police right away because they needed to know where Ashley was. At first, Adam didn't pick up their calls, but eventually turned on his phone and contacted the detectives. Adam told them he had no idea where Ashley was and claimed he had been trying to reach her the entire time, but she never answered his calls or texts. According to his story, on the evening of February 12th, they got into a serious argument, one that turned physical. He admitted that he had hit her. After that, he decided to leave the house for a while to avoid escalating the situation any further, and he took Winter with him. He also admitted to taking Ashley's car, saying he didn't have one of his own. At that point in the conversation, Adam revealed that he had already left Louisiana and was driving through Oklahoma. Adam's story didn't sit right with the detectives. The more they thought about it, the more they suspected he might have played a direct role in Ashley's disappearance. But since he was in another state, they couldn't just bring him in for questioning. Then they noticed a critical detail. Adam wasn't listed on Winter's birth certificate. Legally, that meant he had no right to take her out of state without Ashley's permission. So detectives used this to their advantage. They contacted police in Oklahoma and asked them to detain him. A few hours later, patrol officers spotted Ashley's car on the road. Adam was taken into custody and thankfully, Winter was found safe with him. While detectives prepared for his interrogation, forensic experts searched the car and what they found was deeply unsettling. Under one of the back seats, they discovered traces of blood. When they ran a DNA test, the results confirmed it belonged to Ashley. For the first time, investigators had physical evidence suggesting that Ashley might no longer be alive, but they still had no idea what had actually happened to her. That was about to change though, because another clue was just around the corner. Soon after speaking with Adam's parents, detectives received an unexpected call from his younger sister. She told them that she hadn't been able to see Adam and Winter the day they arrived. Instead, she stopped by their parents' house the following morning. By that time, their parents had already left for work, and Adam was supposed to be getting ready for his trip to another state. But the moment she walked in, his reaction caught her off guard. He looked genuinely shocked to see her. He seemed extremely nervous, and something about his behavior fell off. Then she noticed something strange. Cleaning supplies were scattered everywhere. It looked like Adam had been scrubbing something in the guest bedroom. When she asked him what was going on, he gave her a bizarre explanation. He claimed he had suddenly felt sick and thrown up on the floor, so he was just trying to clean it up before leaving. She offered to help, but Adam immediately refused. Instead, he rushed her out of the house. Detectives wasted no time. They headed straight to Louisiana and began searching the house with a team of forensic experts. And what they found was horrifying. In the guest bedroom where Adam had been cleaning when his sister walked in, investigators discovered multiple traces of blood. But that wasn't all. In the backyard shed, they found an electric saw and a barbecue lid, both covered in blood. When the evidence was sent to the lab, the results confirmed what detectives had already suspected. The blood belonged to Ashley. At this point, it was clear she hadn't simply disappeared. Something terrible had happened to her. There was still so many unanswered questions. If Adam had killed her in Colorado, why would he transport her body more than 1,000 miles away? And what did he do with it after leaving his parents' house? As detectives prepared to confront Adam with all these questions, the case took another unexpected turn. That same day, February 15th, police in a small town in Oklahoma reached out with disturbing news. Earlier that morning, a gas station employee went outside to take out the trash when she noticed a suitcase sitting near the dumpster. It looked brand new, which struck her as odd. Why would someone throw it away? Curiosity got the best of her and she decided to take a look inside. But the moment she unzipped it, she immediately regretted it. Inside were human remains. When police officers arrived, They confirmed that the suitcase contained a human torso. The remains were sent to a lab for DNA testing. But at first, investigators had no way of identifying the victim. Then, word began to spread about Ashley's disappearance. Oklahoma detectives connected the dots and reached out to their colleagues working on her case. They shared the DNA sample from the torso, and it was a match. Investigators requested surveillance footage from the gas station, specifically the cameras covering the dumpster area. What they found was exactly what they expected: footage of Ashley's car pulling up. Adams stepped out, carrying the very same suitcase, and left it next to the dumpsters before driving away. With this, detectives were finally able to piece together a chilling timeline of what likely happened to Ashley. Based on all the evidence, they believed Adam had killed her on the night of February 12th while they were at home. After that, he came up with a plan. Visiting his relatives would give him the perfect cover to get rid of her remains in multiple states, making it harder for police to track them down. Since Ashley's blood had been found inside his parents' house, detectives suspected Adam had transported her body there. He waited until his parents left for work, then used their electric saw to dismember her remains. After that, he hit the road, dumping pieces of her body along the way. This realization made one thing painfully clear: Adam could have stopped anywhere along his route, which stretched for hundreds of miles. That made the search for the rest of Ashley's remains incredibly difficult. Detectives weren't ready to give up. They carefully reconstructed Adam's travel path, tracing his journey from his parents' house to the spot where he was arrested. Their goal was to find more surveillance footage that might show him disposing of additional remains. Eventually, they found what they were looking for: CCTV footage from a gas station in the small town of Morrilton, Arkansas. The video showed Adam throwing something into a dumpster, but there was a major problem. By the time investigators discovered this, the dumpster's contents had already been taken to a landfill. Determined to recover whatever he had discarded, police launched a massive search effort. More than 40 people were sent to comb through the landfill, but despite their best efforts, they found nothing. Even though Adam's guilt seemed almost undeniable, the fact that parts of Ashley's body were still missing posed a serious challenge. Without a full body, medical examiners couldn't determine her exact cause of death. The torso showed some cuts and abrasions, but these injuries had been sustained while she was still alive, likely as she fought back against her attacker that night. As for Adam, he stuck to his story. Even when detectives laid out all the evidence in front of him, he refused to confess. He insisted that he and Ashley had argued and he had simply left with their daughter, that she had been alive when he last saw her. But with the overwhelming amount of physical evidence against him, detectives didn't need a confession. They arrested Adam and charged him with murder. As prosecutors built their case, they uncovered another damning piece of evidence: Adam's personal journal. Inside, he had written about wanting to kill Ashley long before it actually happened. His journal revealed deep resentment. He believed she was only staying with him for the sake of their daughter. And in a way, he wasn't wrong. Ashley really was living with him just for winter, but that had been their mutual agreement from the start. Adam had wanted more from their relationship, while Ashley didn't feel the same way. At the same time, he wrote extensively about how much he loved his daughter and how terrified he was that Ashley might take her away from him. According to the prosecution, this was the breaking point for Adam. They believed he was jealous that Ashley had started seeing someone new, even though their own relationship had ended nearly 2 years earlier. More than anything, he feared she might leave him for good, taking their daughter with her. That, they argued, was what pushed him to commit murder. And, in a desperate attempt to cover his tracks, Adam tried to make it look like Ashley had simply vanished. He even called and texted her after killing her, pretending to be worried, as if he had no idea where she had gone. Before the trial began, it was revealed that Adam had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and PTSD from his time in the military. But that didn't change a thing. He was still found guilty and held accountable for his actions. In April 2018, a jury unanimously found him guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 12 years. Adam later tried to appeal the verdict, but his request was denied. To this day, He remains behind bars and still refuses to reveal where he disposed of the rest of Ashley's remains. One final detail I want to mention. After Adam's arrest, Winter was placed in the custody of Child Protective Services, despite both sides of the family wanting to take her in. What happened to her after that remains unknown, as authorities have kept this information private due to her age. So, all that's left is to hope she was eventually placed with relatives and not left in the foster care system. The case of Mark Orrin Barton. Mark Orrin Barton was born in April 1955. He was the son of a soldier and lived in many different places throughout his childhood, as his parents moved from China to various states. Later, his family moved to South Carolina. During this time, his parents' marriage began to have problems. Eventually, his mother filed for divorce and raised him on her own, but he maintained contact with his father. From a young age, Mark was a reserved person and found it difficult to connect with other children. Perhaps it was this loneliness or the curiosity of adolescence that led him to experiment with illegal substances, resulting in unwanted consequences. Mark quickly became addicted to hallucinogens and was caught stealing from pharmacies multiple times, but he did not face severe consequences. Nevertheless, these issues did not prevent Mark from going to college. He attended Clemson University and earned a degree in chemistry. Despite this, he struggled with his addiction throughout. After completing his education, Mark was arrested for theft again while trying to obtain money for drugs. This incident occurred just a month after he received his diploma, allowing him to avoid any academic repercussions. Had he still been in school, he likely would have been expelled. However, fate seemed to favor him many times as he escaped serious consequences for his mistakes and wrongdoings. This all took place during the psychedelic boom of the 1960s in the United States, a time when many people experimented with drugs, including Mark. Mark then decided to experiment on his own to create illegal substances based on his knowledge of chemistry and passion. As a result, he encountered several overdoses during the experimentation process, leading to hospitalizations. In those cases, he was always saved, and many believed that he had two personalities, one being an excellent chemistry graduate student and the other being a man struggling with addiction and psychological problems. By the age of 29, Mark had extensive knowledge of science but continued to face the challenges of drug addiction, which caused hallucinations. During this time, he moved to Georgia, where he met his future wife, Deborah Spivey. Their relationship progressed quickly, and they soon got married. Mark found a job, but when he became a co-founder of a chemical production company, his employer required him to relocate to Alabama. Unfortunately, due to various issues, he lost that job shortly afterward. During this period, his mental health began to decline rapidly. Deborah noticed increasing signs of paranoia and witnessed his emotional outbursts. He became convinced that people wanted to harm him and often acted nervously and strangely, believing he was being followed and monitored. Despite these challenges, Deborah loved Mark and wanted to help him. They had 2 children together, Matthew and Michelle. However, as Mark's mental health continued to deteriorate, the atmosphere in their home shifted. He began to display more manipulative and controlling behavior, particularly towards Deborah. This situation quickly escalated, and Deborah started to feel unsafe for herself and their children. She frequently expressed her concerns to friends and family, mentioning that Mark's unsettling gaze frightened her. During this difficult time, Mark was fired from his job because his team complained about his inappropriate behavior. The day after Mark was let go, a curious incident occurred. Someone hacked into the company's computers, deleted data, and stole information. Mark denied any involvement, but the investigation soon connected him to the crime, proving that he was the hacker. He was arrested, but surprisingly, the company decided to drop most of the charges against him, resulting in his release after a brief period of imprisonment. It was later discovered that Mark had manufactured and sold several illegal chemicals while co-founding the company. To protect his reputation, the company allowed Mark to leave without being prosecuted. There were no records of his criminal activities, as the employers reported to the police that their dispute had ended peacefully. The scandal started when their family moved to Atlanta, Georgia. Mark quickly found a prestigious job at a manufacturing company known for its chemical production. During this time, he also became a sales representative for chemicals at another organization. Deborah shared with her loved ones that Mark's condition had significantly improved. She felt positive about their marriage and believed their relationship could be salvaged. This was important to her because if they divorced, their children would be hurt. During this time, Mark became more relaxed and appeared to have stopped using drugs. However, there were simpler reasons for this change. While working, he meets a 20-year-old girl named Lee who has just started working as a secretary at the company where he works. They hit it off and soon began flirting, dating each other. Mark fell deeply in love with her, and their affair lasted for quite a while. By 1993, it seemed like Mark had no problems at all. He looks great, is active, makes a lot of money, doesn't do drugs, has a loving wife, beautiful children, and even a mistress. Everything appeared calm until Deborah started to suspect him of cheating. Initially, Deborah tried to reassure herself, thinking that Mark was simply experiencing a midlife crisis. He had indeed started taking better care of himself and looked younger. However, suspicions about him having an affair began to emerge. He insisted he had no affairs and was only trying to maintain his youthful appearance. At the beginning of 1993, he purchased a life insurance policy for Deborah worth $600,000. It was later discovered that he had tried to buy a contract for over $1 million, but he did not have enough money to pay for it. In June 1993, Mark and his lover Lee went on a trip together. Mark tried to convince his wife, Deborah, that it was just a business trip to a nearby state. During this time, he confessed his love to Lee and expressed his desire to leave Deborah for her. Lee agreed to the relationship, but insisted that he must first get a divorce. However, Deborah did not agree to a divorce immediately. She threatened to initiate a lengthy divorce process, which could take a year or more due to the complex issues involved. At the time, and Deborah were working with a family law attorney. And as expected, the process was lengthy as parenting plans needed to be drawn up and child support issues resolved. In early September 1993, Deborah planned a weekend vacation to the lake with her mother and family. Those around her knew about the problems in her marriage to Mark, but believed they were trying to work through their issues. Everything seemed normal. Deborah invited her husband, Mark, to join them and wanted to take their children along. But their daughter got sick. Their son, Matthew, a Boy Scout, had an important camping trip that weekend. Mark told Deborah he needed to stay home with the kids and suggested she go to the lake with her mother, which she agreed to do. Deborah remained determined to carry out her plans and headed to the lake, where her mother, Eloise, was supposed to meet her. The last time anyone saw them together was on the evening of September 4th, 1993. Everything seemed peaceful and normal. However, on Monday, September 6th, they did not return home as expected. Deborah's father tried to contact both his daughter and wife, but they did not respond to his calls. Mark also claimed he had no information about their whereabouts. Consequently, Deborah's father went to the police to request a welfare check and provided the address of their lake house. The police arrived at the lake house, but when they knocked on the door, no one answered. After a few minutes, they walked around the area but saw nothing suspicious other than cars parked in the driveway. It appeared that Eloise and Deborah were still nearby. There was no sign of them. Officers then discovered an unlocked trailer on the property and decided to investigate further. Inside, they encountered a gruesome scene. Deborah and Eloise had been murdered. There were signs of a struggle and a search for valuables, but nothing was taken except for Deborah's wedding ring. The suspect appeared to have left other valuables behind, such as a weapon left on the kitchen counter and several $100s in cash that Deborah had in her pocket. There was no sign of forced entry indicating the possibility that Deborah and Eloise knew their attacker. It seemed they might have been careless and failed to lock the trailer, allowing the intruder access. Mark quickly became the prime suspect. He was financially motivated. It was the insurance money, and he was obviously stressed about the issues that were coming up regarding divorce, child support, and custody. Deborah is likely to gain the upper hand in their legal battle, making her removal beneficial to him. He could have seized the chance to kill her in a secluded area without any witnesses. Unfortunately, There were no surveillance cameras in the vicinity. After the funeral, the police searched Mark's house but found nothing. They were also interested in his car, where they discovered several drops of blood on the steering wheel and ignition switch. Mark claimed the blood was from a recent cut on his finger. Unfortunately, the blood samples could not be analyzed because they were contaminated with soda, making it impossible to determine whether the blood belonged to Deborah and Eloise. As a result, the police released Mark after questioning. Several witnesses who went camping with Mark and his son Matthew said he left for a few hours and may have committed the crime. This meant he did not have a solid alibi. Despite this, the case was eventually closed. Deborah's relatives were devastated that her children, Michelle and Matthew, were left without their mother and that the perpetrator was never caught. The detectives quickly gave up on the investigation after the double murder. A week after Mark returns home, his mistress moves in with him. She begins to act like a mother, even trying to replace the children's biological mother, Deborah. After the case was closed, Mark received a payment from Deborah's life insurance policy, but it was only half of the total amount, $294,000. Dissatisfied with the payment, he sued the insurance company, which increased the payout to $450,000. From this amount, $150,000 was allocated to a trust fund for their children. At this time, Mark openly expressed his feelings for Lee, declaring that he had never loved anyone so much. It was no surprise when they quickly got married. With the money from the insurance, Mark decided to quit his job to pursue a new business venture, becoming a trader at a brokerage firm. However, after Deborah's death, Mark's emotional state deteriorated. The profitable trading opportunities he once saw turned into multiple losses due to his numerous mistakes. Lacking financial knowledge and experience, he continued to place large bets, leading to further losses. By June 1999, Mark had not only lost his entire fortune, but was also owed $105,000 in debt from the securities he had managed at the firm. This financial trouble resulted from numerous failed transactions he made during that time. Eventually, Mark was fired and lost his trading license. However, he didn't give up and found a new job at a technology investment firm called Momentum Securities, located across the street from his previous workplace. During this time, he was struggling with mental health issues, but no one knew it. Mark was finally fired on July 29, 1999. Mark then visited his former workplace, Momentum Securities, in Atlanta. Upon entering, he spoke with several former colleagues. They found nothing unusual about their conversation and later expressed shock at Mark's subsequent actions. He suddenly drew 2 weapons and attacked. As a result, 4 people died on the spot. Before leaving, he attempted to kill his boss and mentor, Berta. Fortunately, Berta survived. Mark's actions were not random. He had a clear intent. He specifically targeted the office of his former employer, Momentum Securities, where he had been fired for embezzlement. He then planned to continue the attack at a neighboring firm, Altec Investment Group, where he had also been fired. Calmly crossing the street amid the chaos, he entered and encountered Kevin Dial, the office manager. Without saying a word, attacked Kevin in the chest, killing him instantly. The situation escalated when Mark went on to kill 3 other traders, causing panic as people rushed to escape. Immediately afterward, Mark entered the conference room and began attacking the employees inside. The first person he injured was the company's co-founder. By the time the police arrived, the building was sealed off and Mark had already fled. In the chaos, he managed to escape, but one witness saw him navigate through the crowd, get into a green minivan, and drive away. This witness remembered the vehicle's license plate and reported it to the arriving officers, which helped them identify Mark by checking the car's information in their database. Unfortunately, they could not track him down immediately. He vanished in an unknown direction, and efforts to follow the car were unsuccessful. As a result, the police turned to the media to share information about the incident and seek assistance from the public. They needed to warn people that Mark, a dangerous individual with a weapon, was on the loose. Within the first 30 minutes, tips started coming in. An employee at a gas station reported seeing Mark fill up his car and drive off. Additionally, a girl contacted the police, stating that an unknown man had left a weapon with her, and threatened her. Fortunately, she was able to escape from him. The police quickly realized that Mark seemed intent on taking a hostage to facilitate his escape. Afterward, they were able to trace his movements, and a large-scale pursuit began, which concluded rapidly. Mark found himself trapped in a dead end, surrounded. As the police approached his car and drew their weapons, a loud bang rang out. In a desperate attempt to avoid capture, he attacked himself in the head, realizing that his escape plan had failed. As a result, he died on the spot. Now, investigators needed to determine what led Mark to resort to violence. Detectives visited his home, hoping to speak with his second wife, Lee. When they couldn't reach her by phone, suspicions arose that she might have fled. The authorities suspected that Mark could have had an accomplice and might still be planning further violence. It was puzzling that a well-educated businessman would suddenly turn to armed violence. However, when the police searched the house, they discovered something entirely unexpected. In the master bedroom closet, they found that Lee had been beaten to death. They also discovered the bodies of Mark's 2 children, Michelle and Matthew, who had also been beaten to death in their beds. The children's bodies were left uncovered with towels wrapped around their heads so that only their faces were exposed. The police identified the murder weapon, a baseball bat, which Mark had used to smash the heads of his family members. Forensic analysis indicated that Mark killed Lee 2 days before the tragic incident at Momentum Securities. The following day, he attacked his children in the living room. A letter left at the crime scene provides details of what happened. On the morning of July 27, 1999, Mark decided to kill Lee. He claimed to have planned an unforgettable weekend for his children, which he saw as a farewell. In a letter, Mark confessed to killing Lee and her 2 children from a previous marriage, Matthew and Michelle, while they were sleeping. After killing his family, Mark covered their bodies with sheets and placed notes on each of them. Investigators discovered symbolic gifts with the children, a teddy bear and a handwritten note on Michelle's chest, and a similar note along with a video game on Matthew's body. Both notes were dated July 29th. Mark did not explain his motives clearly, believing no one would understand his actions. Instead, he expressed his deep hatred for life and societal values, which he had felt for months leading up to his drastic choice. He claimed to have loved his family and hoped to reunite with them in heaven. He aimed to kill them quickly and painlessly, thinking that the children would suffer without their parents, and he believed God would take care of them in the afterlife. Detectives believe Mark was dishonest in a letter he wrote, in which he claimed that he saw death as his only escape. Instead, he planned to let Lee and the children die with him. He did not die immediately after the massacre. Rather, he attacked his workplace and fled. Mark initially intended to start a new life, but felt compelled to die when he realized he would face prison. In total, 9 of his former colleagues and 3 family members died, while 13 others were injured but survived. However, many people think that Deborah and Eloise should also be counted among the victims. At the time, his children were 8 and 11 years old, and his young wife, Lee, was 27. Before going to Alabama, Mark intended to take the lives of those he believed wanted him dead. His first wife, Deborah, often expressed to her loved ones that moving to Alabama marked the start of his downfall. After moving in, Mark's work performance declined rapidly, leading to his dismissal. He was later caught sabotaging company data, but this incident was kept low profile to avoid damaging the startup's reputation. As a result, Mark received a short prison sentence. Having lost all his money and faced multiple firings, Mark became despondent. The police found similarities between the murders of his first wife, Deborah, and her mother, Eloise, who were both killed in a trailer. Mark is the prime suspect, but has consistently denied any involvement, yet the police consider him guilty. The murders shared a similar method, and the same weapon was used. Additionally, he was the only one with a strong motive. He also had access to their home and was among the few who knew where Deborah was with Eloise, as there were hardly any strangers in that area. Neighbors were aware of Mark's frequent arguments with Deborah, leading them to believe he was the one who had killed her. Currently, it is impossible to prove Mark's involvement in the deaths of Deborah and Eloise, as Mark, the only person who could have confessed to the crime, has since died. Authorities suspect that Mark's motive for attacking Deborah was the insurance payout he received shortly after the murder. He used this money to support his trading career, favoring high-risk investments that ultimately failed. The reason he blamed those around him for his financial losses in the stock market remained unclear. None of Mark's colleagues understood his aggression, especially since his targets were just ordinary workers doing their jobs. These individuals had done nothing to harm him and were not responsible for his failures or job loss. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.